Hi, welcome to YA ThrillerCon, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tom Ryan, who's this amazing YA thriller author. So thank you so much for joining me, Tom. And we can get started by if you want to introduce yourself to viewers and tell us a bit about you and your books.
Sure. So I'm Canadian. I live on the east coast of Canada in Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island, and I've been writing YA fiction for about 10 years. And my first few books were straightforward, contemporary, teens in the real world in the present day, just kind of navigating relationships and lives and school and that kind of thing. And all of my young adult titles feature queer teens because I'm gay and LGBTQ representation is really important to me. And I really enjoyed writing contemporary fiction, but at a certain point, I found that it wasn't stretching me as a writer in the way that I wanted to be. I wanted to be challenged, and I started thinking about ways to, maybe move my writing in a different direction. And a natural fit for me was to tackle mystery thrillers, mainly because I'd read so many of them when I was young. I was a huge mystery reader. I read everything from, old Agatha Christie right through, Nancy Brew and the Hardy Boys, right up to anything by Stephen King. Dark, mysterious, small towns was something that always really appealed to me because I grew up in kind of a coastal small town. And so in 2016, I decided to start my first mystery novel. And I wrote that over the course of about 2 years. And that became my first published mystery, which was Keep This to Yourself, which came out in 2019. And it was a real departure for me. Like I said, I'd been writing, kind of soft, sweet coming of age stories. And this is a really dark, relatively twisted serial killer murder mystery about a gay teen who lives in a very small coastal town. And a year before the story begins, his best friend is the final victim of a serial killer. And the murders were never solved. But everyone in the town a year later is trying to move on, put the murders behind them, when the main character, Mac, finds a clue, which was basically a note from his best friend, the murder victim, who basically implied, I think I know who did this and I need your help. But Mac missed it at the time. And so when he finds it a year later, he feels all of this survivor's guilt. What if I had found the note? Maybe I could have kept Connor from, venturing into danger. And the story kind of starts from there. He bands together with, a new love interest, some of his friends, other people in this small town to try and solve this murder. Things get very twisty. There are a lot of surprises and twists. And so that came out in 2019, Keep This to Yourself. It was, relatively well received. It's won a few awards. Readers still get in touch with me to tell me how much they enjoyed it. And basically the reception of that book told me that I was on the right track, that mysteries was something I should continue to pursue. So last year I came out with my second mystery thriller, which is called I Hope You're Listening. I Hope You're Listening is, I wanted to write another thriller, but I didn't necessarily want to go quite as dark with this one, because Keep This to Yourself is extremely dark, and I needed something, I won't say light, but I needed something a bit more optimistic. And so this is the story of Delia, who is 17, and 10 years before the story begins, she was playing with her best friend Sibby in the forest behind their subdivision, their neighborhood, and her friend Sibby was kidnapped in front of Dee's eyes. And Dee was the only witness, but she wasn't able to give the authorities any information that would help find her friend. So her friend has been missing for 10 years. And so, she feels a lot of guilt over that situation. And as a way to kind of self-therapize, if that's a term, she decides to start a true crime podcast devoted to reuniting missing people with their loved ones. And she disguises her voice. She does it totally anonymously out of her bedroom in the middle of the night. And to her surprise, the podcast ends up being kind of successful, and some people start to get reunited. She develops a really big following almost overnight. People are really invested in this podcast, in the idea of helping people, tracking down clues, tracking people down. And so that's kind of where the story begins. She has this podcast, she has this ghost in her past, and near the beginning of the story, another young girl goes missing from her old house, where she'd been living when her friend was kidnapped. And indications seem to imply that the two cases are somehow missing, even though they're a decade apart. And so Dee has to decide whether she's going to risk her anonymity and begin using the platform that she's developed to help find this girl. And then clues start to pop up that maybe her best friend Sibby is still out there somewhere. So there are several mysteries going on at once. There's the new missing person, there's her friend, and then there's another case that's takes place through the transcripts of the podcast. So it was kind of a juggling act for me to keep those three storylines, the tension working at the right moments, but it was a lot of fun to write. And so those for now, those are the two mysteries I've got out on shelves.
Yeah, they sound great, and I love books that have multiple storylines going on with multiple mysteries. I'm really curious, when you started first writing that, did you know it was going to have those different storylines and different mysteries that you would then be sort of like bringing together, or did that sort of evolve as you were writing it?
It evolved. So my process for writing both books was very different. And I know we're going to talk a bit about that. But I will say that with Keep This to Yourself, I knew the ending before I started writing. I knew what I was writing toward. With I Hope You're Listening, I had a very vague idea. I had this idea of a young teenager basically operating and anonymously operating a true crime podcast. And I started asking myself, how could I take that concept and then bring a real life mystery into it? So I kind of always knew that there would be a mystery in the podcast and then a mystery in the real world. And then as I started kind of developing the story, this third mystery came in and kind of pulled those other two storylines together. And generally I like to plot my books out before I write. And I did plot this one to a point, but I left a lot of open space. So I didn't really know where the story was going until I got, pretty far into it.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really cool. And I saw that I Hope You're Listening won the LGBTQ Mystery Award at the Lammys this year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What was that whole experience like? Like, first of all, finding out your book had been nominated and then finding out it was the winner.
It was amazing. It was totally shocking to me. I was actually a Lambda literary fellow back in 2017. And the Lambda organization, for people who don't know, it's the world's largest LGBTQ literary organization. And they operate, they have lots of different programs and different initiatives. The big one is the Lammys, the Lambda Literary Awards. But they also have an emerging writers retreat every year in Los Angeles. And they have a cohort for fiction, nonfiction, poetry, playwriting, and young adult. So in 2017, I took a very early draft of this book to LA into the young adult cohort. We were led by Melinda Lowe, the amazing Melinda Lowe. And so I got a few of those chapters workshopped with some really wonderful, supportive writers, queer writers, in a really supportive environment. So Lambda means a lot to me, has meant a lot to me for a long time. I really have appreciated and admired what they do for the literary community, for the queer community. They do a Writers in the School program for young, they send queer writers into high schools. So they're a great organization. To get nominated was amazing. It was nominated not in the young adult category, but in the LGBTQ mystery category, which was a real surprise to be nominated up there with out of the whole pool of mystery thrillers. And I really genuinely did not expect to win. I thought, I'm the YA, kind of the token YA book in the category, and I can always call myself a Lambda finalist, and that's great. I'm so excited. So I watched the awards with no expectations, and then I won. And honestly, it knocked me out of my seat. There were tears. I was completely speechless. And my husband was with me, and I'm not I'm not typically at a loss for words, but I was really at a loss for words, like mouth hanging open, and just to feel validated and recognized by this community that has meant so much to me was really fantastic. And as always with these things, I hope it gets a few new readers will discover my books. So it was a great day. It was on June 1st. It was at the very beginning of Pride Month, and it's
Right.
3 weeks later, and I'm still kind of floating on air about it.
That's so wonderful. Must have been a really exciting moment. And your first book won an award as well, didn't it?
Yeah, Keep This to Yourself won the. I actually have it right here. I carry it with me everywhere. It's the International Thriller Writers Award for Best Young Adult novel in 2020. So that was also really exciting. And those, to win an award for each book kind of tells me that I must be doing something right. I'm on the right path. And that really makes me happy, because I love, as I'm here at ThrillerCon, among so many other writers I admire, I love mysteries and thrillers. I think that there's so much opportunity there to tell a story that's authentic and real, but also has a really propulsive plot. I mean, I know you realize that it's crafting a mystery or a thriller it's like a logic puzzle. There's so much satisfaction when you really get those beats, and when you have a twist and you're not quite sure how you're going to bring the reader up to it without dropping too many clues. It's a really fine balancing act. It's a lot of fun. It's really satisfying when it goes well. So I feel like the success of these two books tells me that I should stay on that path, which makes me really happy.
Yeah, definitely. So I can't wait to see what you come up with next. But yeah, you mentioned before about a little bit about your process of writing and how you plot out your manuscripts. I'd love to know a bit more about that, because I'm the complete opposite when I write. Like, I found that if I plot, I just have no interest in writing the story, because I feel like I've already told it to myself. So I'm always kind of in awe of all these writers who like plot it out and they kind of know what they're writing. So would you like to talk a bit more about your process?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I'm in awe of pantsers. I don't know if you use the term pantsers in the UK, but
Yeah.
pantsers versus plotters. To sit down at a keyboard with the blank page, the blank screen, and just start going. I find that amazing, and I've read so many books that have just blown my mind, and then I find out afterwards that the author didn't really know what was happening until they started writing, and I really admire that sort of organic approach. Generally, for me, I'm a bit of a control freak. I have writerly anxiety. If I don't know what I'm doing every day, or at least have kind of a general idea, I don't feel particularly confident when I sit down at my keyboard. So, this is a process that's kind of developed for me over time. I spend a really significant amount of time figuring out who the characters are, where the story's going, what are the romantic subplots, what are the important secondary characters in mysteries, who's going to be suspicious, who's going to what are the red herrings. I like to know a lot of that stuff in advance. And I do write in 3-act structure. And so I typically kind of have, your old school index cards where I write down ideas for chapters, play with them until I have at least a loose idea of where I'm going. And once I feel comfortable in, I've got the main beats down, I know who the main characters are, I'm pretty confident that I can sit down every morning and start writing my way toward the end. I do always leave myself space, because I want to surprise myself when possible. I want, an amazing location to just kind of emerge, or a character that was not in that original plot plan roadmap to just kind of step out of his door and bring the story in a new direction. So I try to find a balance, but generally I do like to have, a pretty solid plan before I start.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you've got like quite a solid plan before you start, does that mean that your first drafts are relatively sort of well structured then, and that you don't have to do extensive rewrites? Because I know when I'm doing a first draft and I just like have no idea what I'm writing, Like,
Right.
I pretty much have to rewrite the whole thing several times afterwards. So it sounds like your method would be a lot more time efficient.
It's become more time efficient.
Okay.
Originally, my first few manuscripts were just, what is this? I do always find that I get to the end of the first draft, I need to get it out, and then there's always a really comprehensive second draft where I get in, I work on the language, I work on the nuance, I move things around that aren't working. Sometimes I pull out entire, sections or scenes or characters. So that always happens. I do need that second rewrite. But at this point, I find that once I've done the first draft and a solid second draft, I'm really quite comfortable. I can send that off to my agents, and often my agents will come in that middle stage. They'll read the first draft, and I've found, as I've become more confident as a writer and I have a bit of experience, I generally find that the comments they have kind of line up with my own thinking about what needs to be changed, which is good to get that sort of feedback. And so, yeah, but by the time the second draft comes around, I'm at a point where I'm ready for it to go out and start getting shopped around, or if I have an editor I'm working with, I'm ready for them to see it. And by usually at that point, I would like to not look at this book for several months.
Yeah.
I'm tired of the story. Let's move on to something else. And I don't know about you, but I'm very dedicated to finishing what I'm working on, but that doesn't stop a million great ideas from coming to me in the middle of the process. So
Right.
when I do get through that second draft, I'm able to reward myself with something new, which I always really like.
Yeah, you sound a lot more disciplined than I am with writing, because like I have about 6 or 7 manuscripts on the go. Like, it takes me years to finish anything because I just don't work solidly on one thing at a time. So yeah, I just kind of need to work out my time management a bit better, I think.
Well, we all have our own different strokes for different folks. We've all got our own way of working, and at the end of the day, even if it takes you 6 or 7 years, if that process worked for you, and if the book is the way that you want it to be, then there's nothing. There are no rules, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So what are you working on at the moment then? Are you working on anything new?
I just finished the second comprehensive draft of a new thriller. I've been working on it for almost 2 years. I did take a significant break to work on, in the early days of the pandemic, my husband and I were living in another city, away from our family and friends in another part of Canada. And I had, like a lot of people, I had a lot of anxiety. I didn't know, there were lockdowns here, and I didn't know if I would get to see my family. And so I did take some time to kind of write something that was just in my head, almost as a way to get through that period. But other than that few months, I've been working on this new book, this new thriller, for almost 2 years. And I don't want to say too much about it. We're about to start shopping it around, but it's set in 1984. It's an 80s mystery thriller with a lot of other stuff going on as well. There's sort of a musical element and a satanic panic, occult, moral hysteria thing going on. And it has a lot of, I've always loved books and movies that are ensembles that have big casts full of really interesting, think Boogie Nights or Dazed and Confused, that kind of thing. And I always wanted to write something like that. And this is that book for me. It's longer than my other stuff, and it has a lot of great characters who I really, really love. I hope it finds a home, and that I can share it with readers, because it will be so much fun to talk about. It has some great scenes that'll be really fun to read when we get back out and start doing real world readings again. So it's a 1980s rock opera mystery thriller with a satanic panic edge.
That sounds so cool. You have to keep me updated on that, because I'm definitely going to want to read that one.
Absolutely.
So what advice do you have for aspiring authors? Have you got any tips that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, the typical one is read a lot, especially, read widely. I've heard people say if you want to write YA, you should read YA nonstop all the time. I'm more of a, read lots of stuff, read what you like, whether that's nonfiction, adult fiction, romance, mystery, literary, you name it. Read what you want to be reading and let that get into your bloodstream, so that when you get to the point where you want to start writing something substantial, like a novel, you've got the influences that worked on you inside of you that can then, hopefully come out in that sort of magical mishmash way that, you write a book and all these influences tend to come out, whether it's literary or TV and movies or just people you've known. So, try to experience books and also other media with a critical eye, pay attention to structure. That's something that I wish somebody had told me when I was young. I mean, everybody always says, and it's true, sit down, you have to sit down and do the work. If you don't do the work, nothing will, it's not, the books don't write themselves. And that's something I knew starting off. But what I really wish I had paid more attention to earlier on was the structure of a novel. How are the different, there are different ways to structure and write a novel, but get used to them, read about them. There are all sorts of great books on craft. Read and absorb them. Go on YouTube and watch videos that people have done about film structure. The same rules tend to apply to a feature film or even a short series as apply to a novel. Get used to those beats of storytelling. And then when you sit down and you start plotting or pantsing your first novel, you'll have certain things already, certain expectations of yourself, places you need to, points you need to get to, beats you need to hit. So, take it as it's a craft. It's an art form, but it's also a craft. There are tools and techniques and skills that will come in handy if you take the time to learn them. And then, the most important thing, and I think this is the lesson that most of us have, who've had any level of success have tried to follow, is write the book that you want to read. Write the book that is not on the shelves, that you really want for yourself. And I think that, if you want to distill all the advice down to one important point, it's that one. Write something that you would like to read yourself, or that your younger self would have liked to read, and just kind of take things from there.
Yeah, that's such a good point about writing what you want to read, because like I found before that if I'm writing something that I feel that I should be writing but my heart's not really in it, then I'm like my agent can tell if I don't really want to be writing something, because like you end up having a completely different writing style, and then readers would be able to tell as well. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, it's got to be what you want to write, and don't feel sort of pressured into writing something that you think
100%.
you should be. Yeah.
Don't follow market trends. And I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't, by the time you finish the book, find an agent, shop it to editors, something else is going to be in vogue. Focus on what you think you want to read, and there will be an audience for that. If you write it authentically and, you put yourself in the reader's seat as you're writing, that can, ultimately, even if the book doesn't sell, even if you never get published, it's a very rewarding experience. And I do try to tell younger writers, I have a lot of people who come to me and their question isn't, how do I learn to write a book? It's, how do I get published before they've even written a book? And I get that. I mean, we all want to be published. It's exciting. It's fun. But if I could only express to people how the real satisfaction comes from having made the thing in the first place, and whether or not you ever get published, just having written a novel, even if you're the only person to ever read it, it's immensely satisfying. There are enormous rewards in the creative process. So if you feel inclined to, take a crack at it, I wholeheartedly suggest that everybody should try.
Definitely, yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we sort of like close up this interview?
Well, I'm really impressed with this amazing thriller con that you've pulled together. It's unbelievable. There's some great names and some wonderful panels and interviews, and so kudos to you. And also, I just want to say that I think everyone's had a really interesting, weird, difficult in many ways couple of years, and it looks like we're kind of tentatively, slowly approaching the light at the end of the tunnel. And I really just hope to see people, as much as I love doing these online events, I think there's an accessibility thing that's really fantastic here. I am really excited to get out into the real world and start meeting readers in person again, because we all need a little bit of time out in the world after the past couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
It was great. Good luck with the rest of the con, and
Thanks.
thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time.
Thank you.